to record right from the beginning. And let me start by welcoming everybody. I hope this time I am sharing my screen, not like the time when we had Nigel. And I was talking and the screen wasn't there. So first of all, we start as usual with the thank yous. Thanks to all of you for giving us your time and being here tonight. And also to Shrikant for sharing the logistics for this session. So how events are going to unfold, we're going to have a quick housekeeping that will include a little bit of polls. And then we go straight into the session. We want to take full advantage of having Dirk here. And that's the session. And we'll have Q&As spread along the session. And as we mentioned, it will be a free flow. So based on the interest and the level of knowledge, we'll deal with it. There is a typo in the presentation. So at the end, it's not going to be at 5:55. It's going to be at 6:55. So we'll use the later part of the session to have final thoughts and get some feedback from you. So the housekeeping, do's, don'ts, and what to do and what not to do. I think by now everybody has been Zombified enough to know these rules. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to. If you are more comfortable on typing a question, please do. As we have the tradition, we are kindly asking you, and I'll share in our chat area the link for the poll. So what we try to do a fit for purpose survey in which we get some understanding if we have managed to deliver what we have promised, or try to see your expectations, how in tune we were with them or not. So I'm posting in the chat the link. So if you can go there right now, we'd really appreciate it. And start with the first question, which is give us 3 reasons why you are here tonight. And then at the end of the session, you'll complete the survey and tell us how we have managed to deliver to it. It is important to us. It's the only way we can see if we promoted the event right, if we attracted the right people with the right means, or we still have work to do in that area. We also leave it open to you if you want to provide us any kind of feedback, including what you would like to see in future sessions. So fill in question number 1. At the end, we'll fill in the rest. I'll give you just a couple of minutes to do so. And again, you are doing us a favor, and that's what helps us deliver you better sessions in the future. Let's put it that way, and helps us know we are doing a somewhat good job.
You might have to copy the link because sometimes Zoom does not allow you to copy it. You might
so the link, as you can see it on the screen, it's bit.ly. I think I copied the wrong one. So it's bit.ly/STTO107, which is the number of the session for us, STTO, System Thinking Toronto.
It's giving a 404 error.
Interesting. Let's see what happens there.
Just to comment here, I typed the URL and it's worked fine. I've got the questionnaire up based on the original post.
Yeah. So bit.ly.com, it's wrong on my slide. I apologize. So it's bit.ly.com/STTO107. So now you know what you have to comment at the end of the session regarding the quality of this session. Okay, so moving forward, just a super short story. Why Dirk? So I had the pleasure of meeting Dirk last year at an advanced Canadian workshop. He wasn't there necessarily as a student, but as an expert in Lean, working with Dave Snowden on mapping Lean to the Canadian framework. And we somewhat discovered similar passions, one of them being Lean, but the other one being this treat that he pronounces it very well in my own tongue language, which came as a surprise for me from a Belgian, but you know what, I'll always take it. And you can say, Dirk, what these are.
Want me to say? Ja. Papaneus de brisa de vaca que fruta de padure.
Okay.
She's mentala.
Okay.
There you go.
So those are a type of Romanian donuts made with cheese, and then they have preserve on top. So with this, Dirk is, as you've seen from the bio we shared with you, an expert in Lean. He's training across Europe, North America. I know from his bio, Asia is missing, but I know he's there as well.
Didn't I put Asia?
No, you didn't.
Oh, Jesus. I've been from Australia to Asia to North, South America, Africa.
Yeah.
Only Antarctica is missing. I've never been there. Never been there.
Maybe that's the time to do it, before the glaciers are melting. And as a final remark to basically give you an idea of who we are dealing with, I'll quote one of his phrases from a recent panel discussion with Experience Agile, where he said Lean is not a goal but a strategy. Goal is not cutting costs but developing people. That way your organization or you get organized to do things in a smarter way. As a consequence, you become more profitable by delivering more value to the customer. And by going to the value, that's how we move into the value stream discussions. So before we actually give control to Dirk, I would like you to use this poll, and it's important, and Shrikant is going to share his screen now to give us a live preview of it. Let me just also use the link in the chat. So paulev.com/toagility101. And there will be 2 questions there. So I'm waiting for Shrikant to share his screen. So first question is, what is your level of value stream mapping knowledge? So it looks like everybody did value stream mapping, or we only have 1 or 2 respondents so far. So once again, the poll is at paulev.com/toagility101, where 2 is digit 2, numeric 2. So let's give it a couple of minutes for everybody to respond. Any idea how many people responded, Shrikant? So we don't torture anyone by looking at the bars going up and down. So pretty much it looks like 50% of the people have an idea how it looks applied, but then things go down. Okay, so it's more of an average knowledge of value stream mapping. Okay, so let's close the poll on this one. We have an idea. I'm glad I can see we have experts.
Good. If I get a hard question, then
Yes.
the expert can help me out.
Yeah, and can we move to the second question now, which kind of ties it to the industry you're in. So here is question number 2. Are you in a software development, manufacturing, health, financial and or banking and services or other? Again, health and financial or banking are still services, but we wanted to pull those out since there is a special emphasis on them. Yes, same URL. Same URL, polyb. Okay,
change the question, or because it's still the old question that's on the screen? Ah, there it is.
Okay, sorry about that.
So what if we're in software in the finance industry?
So your scope is actually to work with processes in financial industry, or is to develop software?
Well, it would be more around software development inside a bank.
Okay, because that's a good segue into value stream as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah, I know we're experimenting with things, but probably in the future we'll have to do a better job at dealing with the polls. So generally speaking, most of the people here are 50% roughly in software development, 30% in financial and banking, or banking and services 13, manufacturing 6, and other 3. Thank you, Shrikant. So let me get back to the last part of what I wanted to share with you. Okay. So that being said, all we have to do is to turn control to Dirk right now. We are going to hear from him on what value stream design is all about. And I know I had a chat with him about, okay, we all know it as value stream mapping. You go to Toyota people, they have no clue what you say when you talk about value stream mapping, because it's all about information and material flow. And then he said, you know, it's not about mapping, because mapping means I know what I'm looking at, and actually it's the status quo. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to build the future. So with this being said, the floor is all yours, Dirk.
Good.
Take it away. As you see fit.
How do I get to share my screen?
It worked in the beginning.
Yeah, here we go. Sorry, man. There we go. Okay, good evening, everybody, or at least for one person, good night. Hi, Manoj. My good friend is in the UK, so he's also in Europe.
Hello, Dirk. Good to see you. Thank you.
Any other ones from Europe? No? Good. So I'm very pleased that I have the chance here to talk to you guys about value stream design. And it is definitely a free flow discussion, but I prepared, of course, a certain amount of things that I can cover, but I'm very flexible. I have actually prepared 0 slides, so I'm just going to write and draw. I hope you can, my handwriting will be clear, but you can ask any question or we can go either way with this discussion. So the agenda that I actually made for today, let me maybe switch to slides. So the first thing I want to talk about is if we look at value stream design and value stream mapping, or the whole value stream concept, I want to briefly talk about the relevance of all this. So the relevance of value streams, what is it? Why should we even talk about it? Secondly, I want to first talk about some principles behind value stream thinking. The idea is value stream mapping as a method. I could, of course, also do a session where I go into the nitty-gritty details and the mechanics of the tool, but I do not really want to talk too much about the mechanics of the tool unless you have some questions about it, because it would, I would actually need more time for this. The problem is that and I'll come to that later as well, that I sometimes see people use the tool or even not use the tool. So that's why I want to talk in the first step, why is it relevant to think about this? But also when I see people that do use the tool, it is not always used, let's say, to its fullest extent. So I want to talk about some of the principles behind value stream thinking and value stream design. I see most people are not from manufacturing environments, so I also want to talk about some of the challenges that we encounter, some of the mistakes that I made, and then finally, I'm going to talk about value stream mapping or value stream design, the methodology in itself, without going into too much detail, but maybe sharing some of the insights and the pitfalls and what the overall approach is. Okay, now I'm going to start with a question. Assume that you're in a company and you're like an engineer to order, make to order company, and basically we're looking at a quotation process. And there are different types of quotes that we can make, but the quotes that we are looking at is actually we build products based on standard modules. So it's like we configure a product based on standard modules. We could also do products that are not based on standard modules. We could do some completely new products that need to be tested. But let's say the scope for now is quotations that customers are asking us for products that are based on standard building blocks. Now, if you see who is involved in this quotation process, the first thing is we have a desk, which is the reception desk. Actually, customers send the quote, the request for quote to the reception desk, so they get the request for quote, and they put the request in the system. And we have one person there. Then it goes to an engineering department where we have multiple people, but actually there's 2 people in the engineering department. that are actually working on the quotes. And basically what they're doing is they're looking at the cost, they calculate the cost, and they put a price on whatever the customer is asking. Then it goes to the supply logistics department, where they're going to look at the sourcing part, like, do we have all the components? Do we have all the materials? So we look at availability of materials, and we try to also determine lead time for delivery. And then finally, the quote goes back to the engineering department. And here in engineering, we have an administrative person that is just, let's say, finalizing the document, put it in the system, and then sends it to the customer. So basically, we have a quotation process where we have 4 steps. Now, the problem is it takes too long for quotes to get out. So we get some complaints, or we're missing some orders because people are not willing to wait so long for the quotes, or they're waiting, and in the meanwhile, they already look for someone else. So if we want to tackle this problem here, what would you guys like to know in order to approach this? What would be your approach? Maybe if there's anything you would like to know, you can type it in the chat and I can give you that information. What would you like to know?
Just off the top of my head, 2 things I'd like to know is how long is it taking now, and how long do we want it to take?
Well, typically, if we look at how long it takes now, then I can say the overall lead time is basically about 6 days.
6 days. Okay.
Roughly. And how long do we want it to take? As fast as possible, preferably within 2 days.
Cool.
How much of that 6 days is actually spent working on the quote?
How long is spent on working on the quote? We did do some measurements here. Basically, at the reception, there's about 1 minute of work. Here, it's calculating the price is about 3 minutes of work. Looking at the availability, 4 minutes of work, and another 2 minutes of work here to do the last administrative activities. Anything else you would like to know? Oh, I see in the chat here. What's the touch time of each department? So that's what I gave. So the total lead time is around 6 days.
What's the wait time between?
Yeah, the wait time, it's the question is if you want to measure that, are we just measuring 1 or 2? So basically what we actually counted the number of waiting parts, but roughly we can say there is a wait here about 1 day. There's a wait here 1 to 2 days. There's a wait here 2 days, and there's a wait here, let's say half a day to 1 day.
How many quotes are waiting in between each step?
How many quotes are waiting? You mean like the moment that we do the analysis? Like we sit in the helicopter, take a picture. There are 35 requests for quotes here. There's 37 requests for quotes here. There are 72 waiting here. And there are 23 waiting here. So these are the ones that are waiting and not the ones being worked on. What else do I see here? Delay time. How many customers are we losing? Way too many. Does the customer have direct access to the entry system? No, they just send in the quote, and then the person at the reception puts the quotes into the system. Any other questions? Yeah, I see one person said, see where the waste is, but okay, the waste is, yeah, where is the waste? There is waste, of course, in all the waiting. There is waste probably in all the touch times as well. How many times you have to click open screens? How much does it cost to process the RFQ? You mean like you want to do the labor cost calculation? Well, that's a good question. I don't have, we don't have these numbers right now for the cost. But of course, we could say, like, if you look at what the rate is at the reception, the rate for the engineers, the hourly rate of supply people, we could also then come up with the cost, of course, of, let's say, a direct cost of making the quote.
Yeah,
Is this the only process each of these people are working on, or are they shared resources among multiple processes?
Actually, it's not the only thing that they work on, because this is just quotes. So if you, they're all doing other work as well. Other questions? Is
there any reason why there is no dedicated folks to attend to this?
Why is there's no dedicated? Yeah, if you look at the amount of quotes that they need to process per day, it's very hard to put a person dedicated to this. It will be like idle a big portion of the day. Yeah, Daniel,
but why do we care? I mean, why do we care about that if we're losing customers and ultimately, I mean, just because we want people to look busy?
Yeah, you know, what's the word? Efficiency, I guess, right? It's not that they look busy. They also have other work, because they have to work on, like the engineers, they also have to work on new designs of products that are not based on standard modules, but where they have to redesign or design new modules. So they're actually also doing a lot of other value-added work. So when the amount of quotes that becomes a real order is very low, is less than 50%. Throughput. What do you want to know with throughput? Who's asking that question? Chitesh? You want to know like the amount of quotes that we get? Is that it? I can tell you, typically, if you look at the customers, we're doing about 35 requests per quotes that we get in per day. But there's, of course, some variability there. So there's never 35. Yeah, or every month that we multiply with 20. How many RF can each person process per day? Yeah, it depends on how much time they want to spend to it. Like if the reception has 1 minute to put a quote in the system, so if they work like 8 hours, 60 minutes, minus the breaks, they can process 450 quotes. But we don't have 450 quotes, of course. And like the engineering guys, it takes 3 minutes per quote times 35. So that's why, of course, they also have other work to do. Because that's not even 2 hours per day. Defect count is also a question. Yeah, there are some issues there with codes being incomplete, actually. So sometimes we have to call back the customer for more information. Also, sometimes it's unclear when one department sends it to the other department. So we do have some information on this here. If you look at the sort of quality percentage here, it's about 95. We also looked at what is called percentage complete and accurate, which is actually a quality measure at the input side. This is about 66% here. And here for the supply, the percentage CNA is 80%, and quality is 90%. Here at the end, quality is 100%, but CNA, so which means complete and accurate, is 90%.
So of the 175 quotes a week, how many of those are we losing?
Yeah, we're actually losing more than half.
So we're losing half our business basically.
Yes, yes, more than
Because
half.
we want to make sure people look busy.
Yeah, it's not that they want to look busy, they are very busy because the engineers also have to do budget, they have to calculate budgets from time to time, they have to do some reports, they also have to work on other products. So are you just saying like we just free up these people only for quotes? Is that
No, we're not. Well, the issue isn't the quotes, right? Because we're able to generate quotes. The issue is we're not able to fulfill because we don't have throughput that meets the client's definition of delivered value.
Okay. So what are we going to do then? What's the approach to this problem in order to improve this?
Well, people are still asking questions, so.
Yeah, I see another question was, well, first we would like to know the tact. Oh, well, yes. A difficult word, tact. Are we on time even when it takes too long? If you, I don't know if everyone knows what tact means actually, but if you want to calculate the tact time, I did it for you. It's 13.7 minutes. Daniel?
Why is this wait before 1 or 2 days, 2 days between each of these areas? What is the reason for the waits?
Yeah, because people are busy. Yeah? They're all very busy and they have a full email inbox.
How do they know when it's time to work on an RFQ? How do they know where they get their work from?
Actually, the RFQs coming from the customer reception puts them in the system and then they go into a queue. So they push this into a queue and then, yeah, there's also a bunch of other work there. There's some, actually, there's also some, if you want to know, there's some files that are being worked on, but because of the information, the quality of the information issue, they cannot even finish the work. So if you want to know, there's another 15 RFQs here. There's 24 RFQs here that are just waiting to be processed and another 5 here because of the CNA problem.
Do we have, are we aware of whether our clients are willing to enter their requests into a system?
Okay, so if we're going to ask the clients to enter the system, what do you want to do? You want to eliminate the reception step? Is that what?
Well, not necessarily maybe all of it, because there will always be some complex or advanced quotes.
Yes.
And so then my question becomes, what's the percentage breakdown between what we would call easy on the bottom, level 0 and 1, and let's say complex advanced quotes like a 3 or 2.5, whatever.
I would say the fact that the standard modules is not the most complex quote of all, because if you have to really come up with a completely new design, but still let's say the variety, it can be pretty complex.
So it's like like a lot of 1.5 to 2.5s, basically.
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So are there, but back to the question is, do we know if our clients, at least when it comes to the configuration requirements that they'll have, which that has to be captured, right, at a minimum level, are they willing to go into a system so that we could change possibly the definition of an end-to-end quote, right? So that we change the visibility of what a quote is, so everybody could see the flow of the quotes and what would be defined as, you know, what's in queue, and then we can organize around that.
So basically, right now it's engineering that actually decides which are the modules and what the exact configuration is to fulfill the need of the clients. The clients do not always have the knowledge themselves to pick the exact components of the product. So that's why we need engineering. Now, you were suggesting to have a system where you can actually see the quotes, right?
Yeah, where you start to capture visibility and then maybe change the reception role, where you have basically the equivalent of engineering ops working with the RFQ lead.
So we need a sort of control tower that actually then monitors the queues.
Yes. And then they're able to sort of burst accordingly to, so that you don't have to suck in all the rest of the different the different component teams.
Okay, so I see, and there's also some other people putting stuff on the chat, but this is just like a sort of warming up question, because the point that I'm trying to make here is, of course, there's a problem here. We need to figure out some data. Now there is some data, and then if we say, how do you want to improve? Then typically, there's someone who knows more workflow cycles. Very good, Jeffrey. So at some point, what was going to happen is people are starting to first look for the ways and shoot for some ideas and some solutions that actually could help. Well, there might be, what I'm going to say, that's why I call this value stream design. I want to suggest a more structured, systematic approach instead of the sort of brainstorming approach. Because basically what we're dealing with here is what we call in Lean a value stream, right? So let me just hold a thought here on this exercise, and let me come back to it after I explain some of the basic concepts. First of all, the first thing, if we talk about Lean, I hear still a lot of people say Lean is about eliminating waste. Well, actually, Lean is more about flow than about just eliminating waste. And I still have some discussions with many people around the world, although it should not actually be that unclear, because if you look at one of the seminal works in 1996, there was a book published which is called Lean Thinking, written by Jim Womack and Dan Jones, after they did this big study in automotive industry out of MIT to compare, let's say, Japanese with North America and European car industry. And they discovered that actually the Toyota production system is more than a set of tools, but like a sort of strategy to think, a pathway to think about how do you organize everything you do in a smarter way. And they really did a good job in capturing the essence of Lean thinking in 5 principles. So in the book, they describe it as 5 principles, but basically, actually, they're more like 5 steps. And these 5 steps are as follows. Step number 1 is correctly specify value for the customer. So we always start, yeah?
Sorry for interrupting. It doesn't show on your screen if you are writing something.
That is very weird. How does that come?
It looks like something got wiped on the original question slide, but it doesn't look like you moved forward. So either you can stop sharing and reshare.
Yeah, I need to, sorry about that.
No worries.
It says here your screen share is paused. How the heck did I do that? Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing.
Yep. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. Because, yeah, you know, when I'm in the flow of...
Yeah, it's hard to stop the flow when it's going.
Come on. Yeah, I think we're back now. Eh?
Yep. We're back now.
Thank you for catching this. So the first thing is we need to capture or try to be as specific as possible what is value for the customer. And why do we need to do this? Well, I always say to people, if you say like, let's look for waste, and they say like, we need to look for waste, and my first question is always, what is value? Because if you do not know what value is, how can you be clear on what is waste? I'm an engineer. If I want to put it in a formula, waste equals 1 minus value. So we really have to be clear what is value first before we can say what is waste. Now, the second step here is now the question, how are we currently organized to create the value throughout the organization from start to finish? And this is the concept actually of value streams. So the second step is we need to identify the value stream or value streams, which is the way how we are organized to create this value throughout the organization and bring it into the hands of the customer. And then we're going to see like, oops, not everything that happens here is value. There's also some waste. We need to get rid of the waste. So we need to reduce or eliminate waste. Now, what is, this is actually the first time that the word value stream pops up. What is actually critical here is if you talk with a lot of people about value versus waste, I see, and of course there's I guess you know there's 7 types of waste or 7+1 types of waste if you want to take the unused brains and skills and talents also in there. But many times if you ask people to look for waste, there is this automatic reaction of people that they start looking for waste from the resource perspective. We look at machines that are down, we look at processes that are stopped, we look at people that have to walk way too much, we have to look at people that have to do over-processing, or there's a lot of motion. It's not always so obvious to look at value versus waste from the perspective of the product in itself. So the product or the thing that has to go through the different steps. And like in this case, a request for quote that has to go through the steps to be converted to a quote. Or if you take a hospital example, the sick patient that comes in and the patient is then the product, so to speak, that goes through the different steps until at the end I get like hopefully a healed patient. The concept of value stream, what is important here, this is actually product view. So we're following the product going through the different steps. And the steps could either be value added or the steps could be non-value added. Now, if I sometimes say if we would be just eliminating waste, then Womack and Jones could have stopped writing the book here because you just identify the value stream, you start shooting for the waste, and we're done. No, actually the elimination of waste is important, but it is not the goal, it is the enabler to go step number 3. And step number 3 is improve the flow of value. Now, if we want to talk about this thing here, what is the flow of value? What does it actually mean? And basically also what does flow mean? Then also there, I see there's quite some misunderstanding. Also outside of office service environment in manufacturing, because then we think about the moving line from Henry Ford or whatever. We think like if the car is moving, if the product is moving, then we have flow. But basically in this context, flow has nothing to do with something that is moving. There should not, actually something should not be physically moving. If you're in a hospital, I can move with patients for kilometers. No one is getting healed by just being moved for kilometers. If we talk about flow here and actually flow of value, basically, if you link this to this value stream concept where you look at the product, the question is, are we, if we look at the product, doing the one value added activity immediately after the other value added activity? That's the idea of flow. So I have to look at the activities that I do on the product, and the product can sit still or can even be intangible, it doesn't matter. I look at the activities that are happening to the product. Now, if I typically teach about flow, I always like to use some analogies. What I then do is say, look, if you go and watch a river and you look the water does look, this is flow. So if you now go inside, you watch your product being transformed. If you organize yourself so like the river, so you have value, like all the value added activity, all the value adding steps are coming immediately right one after the other, like the river, then you have flow. So the question is here, when it comes to flow, are you like the river, or are you more the amusement park, where I have all the attractions, and I spend 8 hours in the park for 50 euros, and I spend 8 hours in kilometers walking, hours of waiting, and 10 minutes of fun. So that's the whole idea of value stream thinking. If you look at many value streams, typically our value streams are more organized like the amusement park. If you think about the quotation value stream, there is only 10 minutes of work and we're 6 days in the park. So that's not really great flow. Now, how is the link between step 2 and 3? We're going to look for waste. And if we eliminate waste, then we free up time for resources. The only way that we can really get some breakthroughs is if we use this time that we free up and convert it into a flow improvement from the product perspective. So if I say in activity, whatever X, I'm now doing 5 minutes of work and I make copies that are not necessary and I do some motion that is unnecessary. If I reduce the waste and suddenly the 5 minutes of work become 3 minutes of work, then I create 2 minutes of time. And the question is, what do I do with this time? If I just use this to get another coffee once in a while or to chat with a neighbor, then you just converted one type of waste into another type of waste without actually really improving. If you use these 2 minutes to do the next value added activity on the product sooner in time, or to start your work on the next product in the queue sooner in time, only then we are actually compressing lead time and we're actually improving the flow. And why do we need to improve the flow? Because then, step number 4, we get all these interesting consequences. And all these interesting consequences are shorter lead times, cost going down, quality going up. We are way more responsive to the customer, and actually we can work better at the pull of the customer. Because that's, of course, the ideal situation. We're not doing anything, or sometimes we cannot do anything. We have to wait until the customer pulls, and then we start doing something, but we do not want to be too late. That's why I sometimes say manufacturing is easy, because if you have a poor flow in manufacturing, people are then going to try to camouflage all this with lots of inventories and say we deliver out of inventory. If you're like most of you guys in an office service environment, it's really hard because you cannot come up with inventory just to camouflage lead time. You cannot say in the hospital, well, next week we expect a lot of sick patients. Let's put some CT scan pictures on the shelf in a Kanban supermarket system. Whenever there's a patient coming, I just give them another CT scan, and then with a Kanban card, with a pull system, I'm going to replenish the inventory, right? Because you cannot make a CT scan if the patient is not there. You cannot make a quote if the request for quote is not in. You cannot develop software if the requirements are not clear or if the customer is not pulling. So if you have a poor flow in office service, this immediately is linked to lead time, which is waiting time of the customer. Okay? Yeah, I see people, Wonderland, I spent most of the night waiting for the new ride. There you go. Still people want to do this, of course. Now, we're not doing this only one time, and this is on the last step. We do this while we strive for perfection. And this is in Lean, the sort of continuous improvement thought. Like, it's not, we have some issues now, well, let's do this once and hurrah, hurrah, everything is solved. No, we do this while we strive for perfection, which is something that we strive for, but that we never reach. I sometimes see in Lean, and I'm a little bit picky sometimes with wordings and vocabulary, because if you want to convey a message, we should use the right wording. I say sometimes in Lean, there are no Lean projects. If people talk about Lean projects, that's a contradictio in terminis, like we say in Latin, or an oxymoron. Because if you say the word project, then everyone already thinks about there must be a start, 3 milestones, and a stop. When is it over? Well, if you think about Lean, about improvement, it's never over. We can always do better. So why are we then communicating to people about Lean projects like as if there is an ending? Now, also here, if you look at that river versus amusement park analogy, if you understand that in most cases, if you look at lead time, the value added portion is rather small versus the waste, right? So it's rather amusement park and not so much river. Then you see that traditionally, what have we been doing? And I'm an engineer, so I know what I'm talking about. And also our cost systems are actually promoting this. We're going to look at the activity portion, and we're going to make this faster. So we're going to automate, we're going to put systems in place to automate. We're going to make high-speed lines. We're going to put IT solutions. And then actually what happens is, hoorah, hoorah, maybe at some point, I'm able to shave off 50% of all these activities. And like I said, many cost calculations are actually also based on the amount of hours or minutes, whatever the touch time of people or machines that we're going to select. Well, we have a huge saving. Now, if you look at it from an overall lead time perspective, basically, we just saved this much. Right? This is like saying the amusement park, like normally the ride in the roller coaster takes 1 minute. Today, you get a 2-minute ride. Hoorah, a 100% improvement. Well, if you have 10 minutes of fun over 8 hours in the park, or 11 minutes of fun over 8 hours in the park, I would not call that a breakthrough, right? Or I've seen this in hospitals where the registration procedure, for example, was made faster with the EID system instead of filling out 3 forms. So now instead of spending 4 minutes at the reception desk, registration desk in the hospital, we only spend 1 minute. Yes, we save 3 minutes. And what happens with the 3 minutes? Well, you just go to the waiting area, and because the next process is not going faster, the doctor is still there, you just wait 3 more minutes. So we converted one type of waste into another type of waste. Many times, it is actually better just to say, let's leave the activity, the value-added portion of the activity as is, and let's try to focus on everything in between. And if you can get rid of 50% of the waste here, then you get a much bigger breakthrough without even touching the processes by themselves when it comes to flow. Okay? Now, the second thing I want to say is, if you look at the different types of waste, and we say like, well, we should reduce and eliminate waste, then of course, no one has zero waste. All 7 types of waste being zero, that would be perfection. So there's always going to be some waste that we, for now, have to learn to live with. Now, if you see some of the books, and here I come with my language thing again, some of the books are saying there's 3 types of activities. First one is value. The second one is waste or muda type 1. And then you also have waste type of muda, that's the Japanese word, type 2. And what's the difference between the 2? Well, type 1 is, well, we know it is waste, but actually it's kind of like necessary waste. We have to do this. Transportation, we cannot put 2 workstations next to one another, so we will have to do some walking, right? Or we need to gather some data for a report, or there's this waste, we know it's waste, but we cannot get rid of it. Well, this year, the type 2 is the pure waste, and this waste must go. Now, I used to teach this as well because it's many of the books, but I actually stopped doing this because this is a very dangerous notion. Because the moment that you say to people, this is necessary waste, right? This is the excuse to stop thinking. And then before you know, everything becomes necessary waste. Yeah, this is necessary, this is necessary. And actually it can even be worse. I've seen some companies where they call this business value added activities, which really makes me fall off my chair because it's waste. Why do you call it value added? And what the heck does business value added mean? Like it adds value to the business? That's really weird because the concept of value should be linked to the customer. And what adds value to the customer automatically adds value to the business. But if you call this business value added, well, I would think like the more we do of value added, the better. Well, probably not, because it's waste. Now, again, I understand the concept that we cannot get rid of all waste, but what I do, I call this differently. I say, well, this is waste, as a temporary, and no one says how temporary is, countermeasure. So we have an issue, and for now, as a temporary countermeasure, we have to put some waste in place, but it will always be waste, and it will always be looking at how can I get rid of it. And the analogy that I use for this is actually a picture that can be found in the books in the 70s already on Just in Time. Like there's a river, and I'm in a boat, and I need to cross the river. But in the river, we have many rocks. There's, you know, all kinds of rocks, which is problems, which could be training issues. It could be reliability issues of equipment. It could be people that do not want to work together, so lack of teamwork. It could be incomplete information. It could be layout issues. It could be cultural issues. It could be actually anything. Now, of course, if I need to cross the river with my boat, I must make sure that the water is high enough so that I'm not crashing the boat on the rock. And in this analogy, the water is actually the waste that you put in place. So if you put the water high enough, you don't see the rocks. But on the other end, if there's rocks, there must be water. So no one says in Lean, like in the bathtub, you pull the plug and suddenly all the water is gone and you're sitting there in your boat in front of the Rocky Mountains or whatever. That really doesn't work. So there's always going to be water, right? And like I said, it could be inventory, but it could also be capacity, for example. Like if half of the requests for quotes are coming in incomplete, well, I just put an extra person there that is calling the customer or emailing the customer or whatever, and then to get all the information. And then by the end of the day, I'm still fine. But then I put extra capacity basically to cover up the rock, which is the root cause of the problem. Now, what do we need to do here? Well, in Lean, we strive for perfection, and we want to get rid of waste, so the water level must go down. But there will always be water. So you see in value stream design that I will talk about in a bit, there's never going to be a value stream with perfect flow start to finish. There's always going to be variability, for example, is also very important. Rock variability. Also, always going to be some water, some waste that for now, as a temporary countermeasure, that we have to put in place. Okay? The question, however, is if things run well, if we say like, well, our HR hiring process works well, our quotation process works well, what does that mean? With identify, let's say when it comes to identifying the rocks, so the boat goes back and forth, but who is then still critically thinking like, why can we not lower the water even more? Because that would be the striving for perfection. What are we doing to lower the water? And either you can do it the Toyota way, like with Anno system, you lower the water until the rock sticks out and you're about to crash the boat, so you create a sense of urgency. But then of course you have to have a culture where a problem is good, where you say bad news first, or otherwise you just lower the water until you see the first rock appear, you attack the rock and then you lower the water. And the second reason why I want to mention actually this analogy is if we want to improve things, which rock should we attack first? Because it could well be that we say like, well, let's do some improvement here. There's a rock here. Let's get rid of this rock here. And we do some improvement activity, and then we get rid of this rock. But if this rock actually is just creating a hole because the other ones just keep themselves in a sort of static balance, well, then the water goes down. I create a hole with some water, and I crash the boat on another rock. And then people are wondering like, oh, we do so much Kaizen, and still we have a lot of issues. So the question is always like, how do I know which rock to pick so I can lower the water? What I see many times is if you do it in brainstorm fashion, and I see like all people gather around the map and say, oh, let's look for waste at bottom of Kaizen. Then before we know, we're looking at all the small, tiny rocks at the bottom of the river, and then people are coming up with lots of issues and lots of ideas, but basically they're all tiny rocks. So I'm not saying that we should not do them, but basically, if we really want to have breakthroughs, we must have a tool that identifies the relevant rocks versus the ones that for now are not so important. Okay? Good. One of the rocks will definitely in office service be variability. Variability, which can either be what I call internal or external. External, like on the demand side, but also internal on the, well, let's say process times or on issues internally, right? Now, of course, we could say like, well, all variability, if you want to see the Japanese word, Buddha for the Japanese, is of course a rock which forces us to put some waste in place to deal with the variability. So it's always, and that's what Toyota is doing heavily, they are always trying to see how can we reduce variability in the mix, how can we reduce variability in the work methods. But, and of course, in their context of making cars, although let's say every individual car at the line is almost unique, they do manage to come up with good standard work and also to find ways to level the mixes called Junka and to reduce variability. But if you go in office service environments, and if you definitely go to more complicated versus complex situations, then there's always going to be variability that we have to deal with. Now, if there's variability, there is 3 types of buffers that we can use to deal with variability in our value stream, which is material, capacity, or time, right? And material, let's say that's typically in the manufacturing context. I can do 500 parts a day. Suddenly I need to do 520. No worries, I have some in the warehouse. I set some safety stock here or some inventory. I pull the 20 out of the inventory because I cannot do 520. And some other day when there's like a small valley in the demand, then I replenish the 20. That's material. Capacity means I can do 500. Today I have to do 520. Well, I just do an extra shift, or I move some people from one value stream to the other. Okay, or I can outsource a part. I have some temp people that I can bring in. The last one is time, but basically I should maybe say lead time. I can do 500. I need to do 520. Well, I will do 500 now, and the 20 I will move them to the next day. So I just add 1 day of lead time to the 20. But if it's still okay for the customer, well, if I have some lead time buffer, that might work as well. So these are 3 types of buffers that typically most people understand. What I do see as an issue is actually these 3 buffers are not independent of one another. And I'm a mechanical engineer by education, so let me draw it like this. These 3 buffers behave like communicating vessels in hydraulics. I don't know if everyone knows the concept of communicating vessels, but it's like if I have a U-shaped tube and I put some water in there, then what's going to happen? The water at both sides goes at the same height. If I push here, the water goes up there. If I push here, the water goes up there. Okay? If I try to push on both sides, well, I can push extremely hard. The water is maybe shrinking a tiny little bit. The temperature and pressure goes up and the tube breaks. So that means that it's actually a sort of strategic choice. If you want to deal with variability in a value stream, which of the buffers are you willing to put in place? Okay, like I said, manufacturing, you have the choice for 3. If you go to office service, you only have 2. It will be either capacity or it will be time. And when it then comes to capacity buffers, well, then I can say, like, if I look at my resources, do I really want to fully load them to be busy or not? Do I have the possibility to scale up or down my resources, or do I have some multi-skilled people so I have some flexibility to move them around. And by the way, for the fully load, probably you guys all know the Kingsman format, like what you say, from 0 to 100% load. If you look at lead time, then we get this thing here going up based on variability. So if you load everything to 100%, and think about traffic on the highway, at 60–70%, the traffic jams are starting way before we are at 100%. So by design, we need to take this into account in value stream design. The last concept that I want to mention here is in lean as a strategy. It is the problem with the word efficiency. This word has been around for more than 100 years. And if you look at the traditional way of looking at efficiency, then we always talk about resource efficiency, because the resources are costing money. So efficiency is actually in industrial engineering telling us something about how do we use the resources. So we need to use the resources to the fullest extent. The problem with that is that if we focus on every resource in every step being 100% efficient, well, we might create some sub-optimized, very efficient, disconnected islands. But when you look at it from the flow perspective, it might be, or it's probably going to be a big nightmare. So that's why, on the one hand, if we look at resource efficiency, or sometimes called process efficiency here from 0 to 100%, we could also look at what is called flow efficiency or value stream efficiency from 0 to 100%. Now, what is this flow efficiency thing? I call this the amusement park ratio. I remember my amusement park analogy. There's 10 minutes of work, 6 days in the park, 10 minutes divided by 6 days. If I put this in a percentage, that's called flow efficiency. Now, ideally, I would like my organization to be here. I do whatever I need to. I need to bring value, create and bring value into the hands of the customer. If I can do this in a way so that I'm like the river, value from the product view, 100%, and all the resources are 100% efficient, fully utilized, well, wouldn't that be great? But this is, of course, the perfection. This is, I sometimes call this the Valhalla in operations, the heaven. No one is there. Basically, every value stream you have is a dot in this quadrant, for example, here. This is a value stream. I have a certain amount of flow efficiency, but I'm rather to the left side. And although people might be very busy, there still might be quite some waste or some failure demand, rework, fixing, broken processes. So assume that I am here, but I want to go over there. Well, lean as a strategy promotes or stimulates or tells us that the route we should take, and I'm going to draw this a little bit exaggerated, would be like this. If we have to choose for improving, we should first try to move to the right and then up, right? And I put this a little bit exaggerated, even if I lose, for now, some resource efficiency. So people that are sometimes saying lean is common sense. I don't know if this is always common sense, right? Because like I said, our cost accounting systems and traditional way of working is not really promoting this. But let me give you an example. I did some emergency department value stream some time ago in a hospital. At some point, there might be a patient that needs an X-ray. Well, you can decide as a hospital to say like, well, let's buy some high-speed, big, latest, newest technology X-ray machine, and they're on the second floor in the medical imaging department. So now this patient in emergency department needs to go to the second floor and back. Or you can say, well, let's put an X-ray device at the emergency department itself. It doesn't have to be a high-speed one. It could be like a slow-speed one, but probably it's not going to be used 100% throughout the day. So the question is, what are we going to do? Because the consequence of not having an X-ray on the emergency department is plus 1.5 hours lead time. And this is just one example of an X-ray machine, but there's some other devices there as well. So the question is, will you allow some parts of the value stream to be less efficient in order to promote, or let's say to stimulate a better flow? Like I said, this is not so obvious because our traditional way of working and organizing, where we focus on the efficiency of the resources because the resources are costing money, and then I reply, but the value streams are generating the money, of course. The traditional way actually wants us to do this. Everything what is done is actually basically pushing us upwards. Now, at the end of the ride, no one can say that time is not important because especially in office service, let's say lead time equals waiting time of the customer. So we do have to move to the right. And then you can say like, well, if you take the green or the red, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same because we end up in the top right corner. It's not the same. But like I said, the more you focus on the efficiency of the different square meters, the more actually you drift to the left in creating very sub-optimized, very efficient square meters. And now, if you're then here and you then have to go completely to the right, it's almost impossible. So basically, it is easier to first go to the right in the lean pathway, and then to tweak on trying to put the right amount of resources in place instead of focusing on efficiency of the resources and then trying to go to the right. Now, this goes, of course, way further than let's map a value stream and we now are all going to gather around the wall and let's say and eliminate some waste. So what is actually making things harder? Challenges. This sub-optimized thinking is a problem because we are typically organized in silos or departments, which is vertical. We are measured in a vertical way, but our value streams are going horizontally through the different departments. So how do we make sure that we always keep the value stream view in mind, also putting up scorecards and not the vertical view? Secondly, our typical systems are always organized in a push fashion, which is I get some work to me, I do whatever I need to do, and I push it to the next step, regardless of what the next step is doing. And especially if flows are not really visual, like in electronic digital environments, we just push, and we fill people's mailboxes, and at some point, like, where do we see where the work is? I sometimes say it was so much easier 20 years ago when everyone had a 200 megabyte disk space, because then you send an email and you got an email back saying quota exceeded. So you know, like, oh, my colleague over there has a whole load of emails waiting. Now we give everyone 50 gigabyte mailboxes, and we can just keep on pushing until they are full. Someone already mentioned this in my first question. A big issue is what is called shared resources. Many of the books and many of the examples that you see in the books are way too simple because they're all with what we call dedicated resources, which means like we have a person or equipment or workstation working only in one value stream, doing this, let's say repetitively, the same process all day. But that's typically not the case. We are working in multiple value streams. And you see, that these are also for people, as far as I know, Scrum a bit. Scrum started with one product for the Scrum team, and the moment that you start putting many different products there, and you make the people in the teams more shared, then actually you're confronted with how do you spend your time on which product or which value stream? What are priorities? And the analogy that I use here is like the crossroads. Now let me just put two ways. So you have cars coming this way, going over there, and you have cars coming this way, going over here, and you are the shared resource sitting in the middle of the intersection. you cannot have the cars from all sides coming at the same time on the intersection because you have a crash. So so the question is, like, how do we regulate the traffic here on this intersection? So do we get the priority ones first and then the other ones, or the one that shout the loudest, or my friends, or the work that I like the best? I only like to do help desk tickets that are not a lot of work, because then my KPI on the number of tickets per day is really going to work out well. How do we organize this? That's question number one. Question number two here is, if you have shared resources, there is always more waste in my value stream, by design. Because if you choose to work like this, there's always going to be queues of cars on the one side or the other side. And then this is just now 2 roads, but I know people that have like almost 5 or 6 roads coming in at the same intersection. And this is a real big problem, because if you now think about how do we regulate the traffic here, well, then, and again, this goes further than just eliminating waste, then what we need to do is we need to come up with a sort of scheduling system. And if you are in manufacturing, then no one looks a little bit weird when you talk about scheduling and planning, because that's what we already do for 100 years. But in some other environments, if you talk about scheduling in an office, then suddenly you get a sort of cultural battle saying like, yeah, but I like to organize my work the way how I like to do it. Okay, so we definitely have to do something around this as well. Now, let me now talk about value stream mapping. Value stream mapping is a tool, and the first time someone wrote something about it was a book called Learning to See. Now, this is a book from the 90s, Learning to See, written by John Shook and Mike Ruther, which is with a manufacturing example and an extremely simplified example. But the basic principles are pretty well explained in the book. The problem is the example is so simple that wherever you go, you never see a simple situation. So a lot of people struggle with it. Now, what you need to know is that value stream mapping, as explained in the book, is a method with 4 steps, which actually already say what is the purpose of value stream mapping. Earlier this week, I was doing a session at some company, and they had in their handbooks, the purpose of value stream mapping is to document all the steps that a product goes through. Well, I don't really think that's the purpose of value stream mapping, because actually, if you follow these 4 steps, and like I said, the book has been around for a long time, then the first thing you need to do is a sort of scoping step, which is called product family definition. I'm not going to follow one quote, because I might have many different quotes that follow the same steps. If I just follow one quote, well, I can always say that one gets priority and has a better flow. The royal quote, in Belgium have a king. If the king says in the quote, all the lights turn to the police blocks all the intersections, the quote goes through, then you have a short lead time. But the purpose in Lean is not to have just for the royal quote a short lead time. So we look at different families based on the different steps, and then we make a current state. But that's only step number 2. And the value stream, in value stream mapping, there are some icons and standard definitions, which is also an issue, because many people write many books, and you see a lot of stuff on the internet, and everyone comes up with different definitions, which I think is actually creating more confusion. But basically, the current state map must serve the purpose. And the first purpose of making a current state map is actually knowing how good or how bad, how is our flow today. So if I cannot see what I call like an amusement park ratio on a map, then it's not a true value stream map. Call it then a process map or call it something different, but that's not what the purpose is. And then we need to make this future state map. Now here, it should not be a brainstorming exercise, but more like a design exercise following some steps so that I can identify the relevant rocks in the river to attack and not all the tiny small other ones where there is some waste. So I can put them on the roadmap or implementation plan so that I know what to work on in the next 6 to 9 months. And this here should be actually a design exercise. Not like, what are all the things that we can improve? When I was in middle school, I had to study Latin. My parents sent me to a Jesuit college. So there is this Roman writer, and his name is Seneca, who wrote 2,000 years ago, if you're sitting in a boat on the ocean, if you do not know where the harbor is, any wind is a good one. And that's what I see all the time, like, oh, we're improving, and the boat goes to the left, and the boat goes to the right, and the boat goes back and forth, and as long as the boat is moving, everyone's happy because we're improving. No, the question is, where should we be? Where is the harbor? And then, which wind do I need? And how strong must it blow to get me to the harbor? And all the other winds that can actually make my boat move, I'm not really interested in these. So that's why this is a sort of design exercise. Now, if you look at the design steps, basically, I need to know something about speed of the flow. How much work is there coming our way? Speed of the flow, and of course, there's going to be some variability here. So how do I organize myself for different speeds of the flow? Secondly, I'm going to look at, well, is there some low-hanging fruit waste? I'm not going to say, let's automate everything with big systems, but I'm also not going to put, let's say, waste in flow. So if I see that there's like a CNA problem, like the information that I get is not complete or not accurate, can I work on the standard work? Can I work on some Pokeyoke systems? Can I educate the customer to give more accurate and complete information so that I do not have all these steps going back and forth, asking for information, because that's basically waste. The third set of rules have to do with flow, which is how do I connect activities? And the ideal situation is what we call a one-piece flow, which is if I have a process A and a process B, why should there actually be a wait between these two? If I do A, can I not do immediately B? If I cannot do this, then I'm going to allow some buffer, but in a controlled fashion. So not with a push system so that it can go through the roof, but typically, and we call this FIFO connections. We're going to come up with some queue where we have a control maximum so that we know that there's an issue, and also where we actually have a sort of fixed sequence so that if we put a priority, that no one is actually shuffling work like, oh, I don't like to work on this, it may be better to do this, because then you create very inconsistent lead times. The fourth set of principles, and there are two, have to do with how do I steer the value stream. Steer the value stream, basically, there we have something which is called the pacemaker concept. At some point, you launch the work in a certain priority, and actually what you want is that this work just flows through your value stream. And secondly, also here we have to deal with how do I steer and prioritize the work through these shared resources. And that's actually what I saw that someone mentioned in the beginning. This is called workflow cycles. Now, what is workflow cycles? Workflow cycles is actually, you can compare it if you look at my traffic light, let's say at my intersection analogy. This is just a way to put traffic lights. Where you say like, well, I put some traffic lights here, I put some traffic lights here, here, and I'm going to allow a certain amount of time for each value stream. Each value stream gets some amount of time to be processed so that I have a sort of guaranteed moment that although I come from the right or I come from above, I know that within a certain time, it will be processed. It will not be inspiration of the moment of that person. Okay. Now, and what you can do then is, if you have multiple shared resources, you can either put like a sort of traffic light system on every intersection, or I can actually try to make a one-piece flow cell where I put the traffic light for a certain, so that is like a little bit like synchronizing the traffic lights on a beltway. In Germany, they call this the green wave. If you drive 60 kilometers an hour, then you know that all the lights will be green by the moment that you pass by. So if you're the product, so we're going to like synchronize the available time slot of all the different resources across multiple steps so that there's no stopping of the flow in between. And then the fifth principle has to do with, how do I organize this value stream in a visual way to know whether I'm on track or not, and so that I can do some PDCA there, and to see whether I have variability. So I need to have what we call sort of plan B and launch a certain buffer. And actually, that's the sort of thinking process that you have to go through when you look at the map. And we're almost there, I think. So let me just finish by going back to the example that I've shown before. So let me, here we go. This would be a diagram map of our quotation system. So there's a first step that is registering the system. It takes a minute, one person. There you see the different inventory triangles. You have two people calculating the cost and the price, three people, and the fact that there's a grid inside of these boxes means they're all shared resources. You see there's a lot of phone and email back and forth, because basically if you look at some of the quality issues here, there's quite some issues over there. And here you see the amusement park ratio of this value stream: 10 minutes of fun, 6 days in the park. Now, first thing you can do, if you would follow these big steps that I just mentioned, is if I look at the speed of the flow, currently, this is called takt time for people that know this. In the current situation, if I say I have 8 hours per day, and let's say I start with 35 quotes per day, then I should be able to process, let's say, the quote every 13.7 minutes. And then people can make what's called a Yamazumi or a balance chart. But then you see here that all the times are below 30, way below 13.7. So it looks as if there is no problem. But there is a problem, because they're all shared resources. So this takt time calculation, in case of a shared resource, actually doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? Because the cycle times are always lower. The second step is, can we get rid of some of the ways? So for example, if we say all the phone and emailing back and forth, and typically these quality issues that are flow stoppers, can we come up with some standard work? Can we come up with some standard input template in order to improve the quality of information, so that we can get rid of all this interaction? And there's no need for let's say, request for quote sitting within the process waiting for additional information. Then we can say, well, can we not think about flow? Now, in this case, these people are sitting in, these are three people, let's say we have the register here, and then we have people sitting in different departments. So the question here is, if these people are in different departments, in first instance, it would look like, well, if they're going to send everything to one another, there's going to be some pileup. But there might be an idea to say, like, well, as they are shared resources, and I jump a little bit here to number 4, could I not put a workflow cycle on it? For example, saying like, I can calculate how much people I need and try to combine these into a sort of temporary flow where I put the lights to green in certain times of the day. And if you would have this data, if you calculate this, then you could see, even with some buffer, let's say roughly 2 hours per day is enough. So if you organize this so that 2 hours per day these three people come together and process all the requests for quotes, well, then every day I get a cycle. So the only thing that happens here is, well, there's a queue here. There's going to be, of course, we want to register a quote immediately. So there's going to be a queue here of about a day. And then every day there's a cycle and everything is being processed. So whatever comes in today, or let's say in the last 24 hours, will be processed now. And then you can say like, well, the pacemaker processes the register, you put it in the FIFO link, and then we can put a sort of cadence on the quotes. Now, of course, there's variability. Then there's going to be some maybe cross-training needed, or there's going to be some buffer in the opening hours of this workflow cycle. And I can explain this at another time, maybe. But basically, you can then come up to something like this, where I say like, well, let's go for 35, but it could be more. So let's make my FIFO queues a little bit bigger, 52. I have the check here. Then I have a queue. I make it, and you don't have to go with an IT system, because basically this is a kind of like a real example. This guy just made like a cupboard where you say I have a green area and a red area. The moment that you have more than 35, they go into the red area and they know that they need to come up with a plan B. Because with their 2-hour workflow cycle and these three people that are going to make the quote in a sort of flow fashion, it will not be enough. So, and for doing this, what are the actual relevant cases that I need? I need to come up with the standard input. I need to do some cross-training and good standard work. I need to come up with this plan B, and I need to organize this cycle. And then you see here that basically, if you look at the amusement park ratio, I still have 10 minutes of work because I did not really eliminate the actual calculation, but instead of 6 days, I have here 1.5, which is even overestimated because I made the FIFO lanes too big to deal with basically 1.5 days of the amount. So the only thing I want to show here is, this is not just I put something on the wall and everyone starts shooting for waste and brainstorming. There is a systematic approach to design. This is the harbor where I want to be, and then this is what you need to be putting in practice in the next months. But basically, this is like the blueprint of how you want this value stream to work. Okay. Now this is a relatively easy one, although they're shared resources. I also have value streams where I need 2 walls to come up with all the different steps. But of course, for today, that would not really, that would just make everything unreadable, and that would not really help the point that I would make anyway. Good. So this is in a glance. What is value stream design? Why should we do this? Why should we care? And what actually the relevance is of really doing good value stream mapping, which is more than a design. Like I said, most people do a lot of mapping, but it's not about the mapping. It's about how do we want to work? How do we find the right rocks in the river? Or how do we find the right wind that blows the boat into the harbor? But in order to do that, we need to find the harbor first, which is the purpose of this. Good. Any questions, comments? I know it's theoretically it's time, right, Andre? But since I'm away anyway,
it's okay. I mean, if you can stay, because you are the only, the most constrained of all of us. I mean, you need the toothpicks or the duct tape to keep your eyelids open at 1 a.m.
Oh, I have matches here. I can always put some matches on like this. Also.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so very much. I encourage everyone who's still on the line to go to the questionnaire and fill up the rest of it. And in the meantime, if you wanna say anything or ask anything, please feel free. So because Dirk is so generous and still stays with us.
Yeah, by the way, I did not read all the comments while I was talking, but I see Jeffrey, lean accounting, you bet. Actually, if you look at the cost accounting system, what we should do is actually make our, let's say our accounting methods more value stream driven versus departmental, let's say, or square meter driven. That actually helps a lot.
Hey Dirk, what is the best way to go learn more about this other than the book? Do you do any online training, any workshops?
Actually, I do a lot of workshops, but let's say for the last 20 years, they always have been live because that works better. And I talked to Andre about this. Actually, I did my first online training, actually with an exercise 2 weeks ago for a group of people in Toronto even. So that was my first experience. And actually, it worked out better than I thought, to be honest. So I might be looking at maybe organizing something online.
So maybe we can put together something for the community.
Is it a public program, Dirk, or was it for a specific customer?
The one that I just did was like for one specific customer, yes. That was like an in-house session. I've been working with these guys for the last 5-6 years. I did a lot of work with them in Asia. Then I did a lot of work in Europe and in Brazil and in the US. And now the Canadian part of the business wanted me. But since I stopped traveling half of March, I was in Texas then when the COVID thing happened. So no travel for me at the moment.
Yeah.
So any other questions?
I do hope that I might be able to get back to Canada one day because I've been in Toronto several times. Actually, a few years ago, I did a lot of work in Newmarket, which is not too far from Toronto. We also have someone in Dutch here, Rencia. I don't know who you are, but Rose must be the Netherlands, I guess. Wilterusten, hè? Should I read? I have to all the chat here. I don't know if there were any questions while I was talking here.
There are no specific questions, Dirk. We have been monitoring the chat.
Yeah. But anyway, if I did not answer your question in my what I was saying, please feel free to ask the questions now.
Actually, it's more of a counterpoint. Since a lot of the people, 40% said they were from software development.
Yes.
I'm a large-scale Scrum practitioner, and for software, especially the creative process of software development, I don't believe in value streams. So value stream is more of a rock metaphor, right? We in software, we prefer to do a kaikaku up front and recast the teams to be more effective from day one. Because software development, again, most of manufacturing metaphors end up being per widget. And the software widget is always unique. Every piece of work the widget created is different from any other piece of work that will ever be done.
But to be honest, the fact that everything is unique should not be a reason not to think in value streams. I did some work, I must say, in pure software development, I never did actually, now I can really say I did a lot of work in, almost no work in pure software development. I did do some work in R&D environments, like in a biochemical company where there was an R&D value stream taking 4 years to develop molecules and where also in advance you didn't know what was going out and whether the test would work in the lab and so. But also there, these principles of trying to get rid of failure amount and especially putting the workflow cycles, making the width visible. And that was across 4 different sites with that actually really made some improvement to get a really big lead time breakthrough. Now,
so I'm not trying to. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is not value stream is very, very valuable. I'm not denying it at all. But what happens with software development is the flipping, the way the software development is being done is the big rock that you want to move. That often they don't do that. They start moving some sand under the lake rather than the biggest rock, the way they develop software. So therefore, they don't really get much benefit from all the changes that go on in the value streams, which is really what I'm trying to point out from a software.
Now I must say I've been Only in the last maybe 2 years a little bit in the agile space. I went to some conferences and I'm reading some stuff there, and I see there's a lot of analogy of what is happening like in the agile work, which is I think comes from software development as well, and Scrum. There's a lot of lean principles that are basically behind it or kind of the same. On the other hand, I do think that if I observe this as, let's say, as an outside observer, the fact that in the whole scaling exercise, when you have these teams that are actually now working on multiple products in multiple value streams, you get to similar challenges that what you have in value streams, where you should think about, maybe I should come up with workflow cycles based on points or whatever, or a system to make sure that if you're on intersections as team member, that you can still provide some, let's say, guaranteed turnaround time for the different value streams that you're working on. And also I see there is, I think, some danger in the way how Scrum goes, like with last day's weather, where you say, like, I'm going to, if you want to do the velocity thing and the points, how do you know for sure that at some moment in time you're just not scheduling waste? Because if the focus is on the result, like we need to deliver something every sprint, we need to deliver, and the focus is on the deliver. The question is always like, yeah, but what did you do? What was the process to make this happen? Maybe there's a lot of failure demand in there, and then you scheduled so many points or whatever, how you want to do it, and then it didn't work out. So then if you just change the numbers afterwards, or you're then not having a sort of camouflage waste in there.
The points are not relevant at all. When you're doing creative work, the point is just an indication of how much you can accommodate, and that is it. So a lot of the work, if you really look at, you were talking about failure demand, most of the work that agile teams or Scrum teams do are waste by itself. They're not valuable to the customer the way software is being done. So, and that's the big rock, and often that's never removed by most organizations.
Plus, I can relate to the fact when you say you never know how long something takes or what's going to happen. These guys in R&D, it was a 4-year lead time value stream. You cannot say, like, let's go to measure here with a stopwatch whether this takes 5 or 6 minutes. We started with like 4 days here, 3 days there. I know it was not 3 days because these guys are meetings, having emails, but you start really high level with some buckets of time. And even there, if you want to put some moments where you put some workflow cycles and and you work better on the connections, there's quite some stuff that you can do there as well, without going into the details of time, because it's not car industry, of course.
Yeah, you want to think of it like Elon Musk in first principles, right? How do I rebuild the car, or how do I rebuild the spaceship to go to Mars? Rather than saying I'll incrementally build better spaceships, which might or might not go to Mars, right? So,
sure, and it's all a matter of, like, say, it's contextual, and the rocks that are in the rocks in the river in software development are different from the rocks in the river in car industry, for example.
That is correct.
But the idea, like, I need to put some water for now to cover the rocks. I think that's generic. So it will then either be lead time or capacity that you need. And these are the only 2 knobs you can turn on it to steer. Any other questions?
Andreas put the bit.ly link again. So if you can finish the rest of the survey to give us the feedback, that will be really helpful for us to engineer future programs. We appreciate that.
We only had 3 responses out of 50 people, so I know we're only 20 left here, but please provide us some feedback. And again, our next session will be October 27th. But again, if you still have a question, feel free to ask it.
Let me say hi to Daniel. Daniel is from the Netherlands. He's also, I know him. I used to have him in my classes, so he's doing the night shift with me. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah. And again, maybe we think of a way to put together a session for whoever is interested. I know it's not a half a day training, so people don't realize that this is not something you learn in 1 hour or.
You know, but if you limit yourself to just putting post-its and then do a high-level amusement park ratio and do some brainstorming, then you can explain this in half a day. But if you really want to go to the design, to these steps, there's some calculation needed, and then it's a little bit more complicated. Actually, we developed also a really nice game with 4 value streams, a sort of office game where 4 value streams going intermingled. I haven't figured that one out yet, how I have to do that online, but that's really one that really really shows the concepts of these controlled WIP and the workflow cycles, and how you can actually deal with the sort of the traffic light systems on different value streams.
So you also have a message, I think, in your own language.
Yeah, I said there's also someone from Hendrik. Well, I saw that name. It must be someone from the Netherlands, I think. I don't know who that is, but it's good to see some Europeans joined as well.
Yeah, always. So if there are no further questions, Dirk, once again, thank you so much for taking the time and getting us through this understanding of basically the principles and the steps to properly tackle a value stream, and also understanding of why do we want to do it, what is the concept behind it, and go to its roots and try to do a proper job. Because I think that's the missing thing in most of the literature that you can find on value stream.
Who wants to hear me sing something here? Robin, do you want to hear me?
Yeah, I can see they make you a rock, so I don't know if that's a good thing or to be eliminated.
Maybe he found these YouTube videos of my gigs in Bucharest, but I don't know.
Let's not go there.
And for me, the big takeaway was from Dirk was your theme park example. That's a fantastic analogy to relate to value received and time spent. So I would use that a lot.
I must say I use a lot of analogies in my teaching because I think like we should be able to explain this to anyone. I need to be able to explain this to an executive, but also people on the shop floor, and then the analogies make things so much easier to understand.
But it's also interesting how you managed to capture the essence of it in under 2 hours. I mean, I can tell you, I spent a lot of time with people talking about this, and it never gets that crisp.
I did struggle a bit, Andre, because there was way more to that. Some more stuff that I wanted to share, but I saw the time, so I thought.
I know, but still, it's capturing this. You know, you can do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of stuff, but if you would start to do it now for the first time, what do you have to keep at the back of your mind when you do it? And I think you captured that brilliantly.
Dirk, on a related note, would you be willing to share your slides so we could even send?
Yeah, whatever I was drawing, I will send it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
So maybe one question from me. I don't know if you want to answer or not, Jeffrey, but were you the one that said I'm a VSM expert? Because I did see some great terminology and stuff from you in the chat. So I think you know more.
I would never consider myself an expert, but
there you go.
I did sit under you, and you did some training for Philips, and sat under you for your week-long advanced value stream map training. So
were you in one of my trainings?
I was, yes.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't recognize your name, but for Philips, I saw so many names. So where were you at Philips at that time?
Yeah, North America in Georgia.
In Georgia.
The training was, I believe, it was actually in Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah. In Pennsylvania.
I think that's where it was. I'd have to double check. It's been a few years.
Yeah, it has been a few years since I worked for. Yeah, was it lighting? Or your professional lighting or healthcare?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Yeah. So was it an Andover maybe?
Yeah, that may be, yes.
Because I did way more work for Philips in lighting. But I also went to near Pittsburgh once, where they made the respirator devices.
Right, at the Respironics facility. Yeah, I think that's actually where it was at.
And I also did one there near Seattle as well. That's also healthcare. Good. Now, maybe if you would have put up the video, I could have recognized your face, but the name didn't ring a bell. But anyway, thank you.
You're mute.
You're on mute, Jeffrey. So your beard's a little bit longer now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. My beard is much longer than it was back then. Yeah. This is the COVID beard.
Because my Corona beard was also
exactly.
my COVID beard. Good.
Yeah, but thanks to everyone. Thanks you guys for putting this on. This is always a good refresher for sure. And dealing with shared resources is always a concern. And I guess my question for you, I work with call centers a lot as well, and it's difficult. You cannot manage the incoming demand for call centers, so it is what it is. So we often have to do the flex. We have to do some immediate bringing in more capacity, most often because we're not really allowed to extend the time. But a question I do have for you that I run into quite often with trying to do the value stream mapping is, do you ever allow for a decision point within your value stream map?
Yes, yeah, but then at some point what's going to happen is there's a certain step, a certain process, and in that process there's a decision, and then either, let's say, the request or the ticket goes this way or goes this way, and then you can follow different steps. Yeah, you can do that, but then you also have multiple lead time ladders. But the question is, I did some work for telecom providers some time ago here in Europe, and they had call centers, and then there was a whole thing with tickets, and then the tickets got in queues, and then there was a big issue, like everything is on a pile. So then you had the champion of the tickets. This guy always selected the short ones, so he was doing many tickets. But from the customer perspective, it doesn't really make sense to do that, because if you have a bigger problem and you're stuck in the queue, this is such an example of sub-optimized thinking with the performance measurement system, which is sub-optimized, and maybe some reward because you got some big applause every year for being a champion in the tickets. And that's, you get stuff if you allow people, let's say if all the inventory is in piles. And the question there is if you route it through different pathways, because that's also what can happen if certain tickets go here, others go there, then you can avoid these type of things as well. And then there is a decision point. But the decision should not be, let's say, inspiration of the moment of the person. If you want to do a good design, you should have some clear criteria. If you want to prioritize, reprioritize, or if you want to say like this goes this way or this way or this way, it should not be like today we have John here, so now it goes here, and tomorrow we have Dean, and then the same similar thing goes there.
Yeah, we see that a lot with standard workflow flow as the calls come in, and FIFO is basically based on priority.
Yeah. But you can have parallel FIFO lanes or multiple FIFO lanes in order to set different priority based on, for example, different service levels to customers.
Yep, we do exactly that. Priority 1, 2, 3, basically, and three lanes basically to approach, so that we have a different expectation of delivery for each priority. So.
Good. Any other questions, comments, remarks before I
go to sleep?
Go to sleep. Silence is no. No
So
question.
thank you once again, Dirk.
Yeah.
It was a real pleasure to have you. And
No, the pleasure was all mine, Andre. The pleasure was all mine.
And have
And
a
I'm
good
a
night.
night, I'm a night person anyway, so staying up late is not that big of an issue.
Okay. So thank you once again, and thank you all for taking the time and being here and being resilient, not giving into.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andre, Srikant, Katrina, for organizing.
Good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Yeah, good night.
Thank you, Dirk.